I was born with a curiosity to explore the realms of darkness, to seek out the elusive shadows and question their existence, their never-ending convolution with the light. All things were born from this darkness.
Waterbabies of Massacre Rocks, Powell County, Idaho. Near the winding flow of the Snake River lies Massacre Rocks. The treacherous pass was used in the 19th century as part of the Oregon Trail. Remnants of the Oregon Trail journey can still be seen there today. The deep ruts of wagon wheels from early immigrants carved a path in the earth that is still visible nearly 200 years later, and the names of the nomads braving these uncharted territories are found carved into the rocks along the trail. Many of those traversing the Oregon Trail never made it. Referred to as the nation's longest graveyard, the Oregon Trail took the lives of 1 out of every 10 people traveling its primitive and natural pastures. An estimated 10 to 15 immigrants died every mile of disease alone. Massacre Rocks, also known as the Gates of Death or the Devil's Gate, is a formation of boulders deposited nearly 15,000 years ago during the last ice age. This narrow pass was feared by the nomadic immigrants, terrified of the thought of an ambush by the Native Americans, but it was the only safe passage across the violent and turbulent waters of the Snake River. On August 9, 1862, warriors from the Shoshone Native American tribe descended upon the weary travelers, killing 10 pioneers. The Shoshone were forced to retaliate, fearing the invasion of their land and the disease brought about by the foreign pioneers, along with the overwhelming consumption of the food supply. The skirmish lasted 2 days. Although only 10 immigrants were killed, over 20 Shoshone natives lost their lives. It was during this time that the legend of the Waterbabies was born. During the hardships of the mid-19th century, famine swept across the plains. Thousands of people traveling west along the Oregon Trail meant that local food resources were being depleted. Both the Native Americans and pioneers were starving. It was during this time that newly born infants were drowned in the flow of the Snake River to save them from the suffering of starving to death. The water spirit saved the souls of the drowned babies, feeding them small fish. The water babies adapted to the water, growing fins, gills, and a tail. They are most commonly seen playing in the water near Massacre Rocks. Although the water babies appear cherub-like and innocent, they are vengeful spirits that lure victims to their death. Many have heard the infantile lamentations of the water babies echoing along the water, and have felt the pull of their beckoning cries. There's an uneasiness reported by visitors of Massacre Rocks, a silent calm that pervades all things. The Pioneer Cemetery, Boot Hill Cemetery, Idaho City, Idaho. During the early western expansion of colonization, Idaho City was a central hub for those traveling along the Oregon Trail. Many left everything behind in the hopes of trying their luck at the growing gold rush. If that wasn't working, then it was off to work at one of the many mining towns popping up all along the western expanse. The options were dangerous, the work was dangerous, but the journey westward was making many men rich. The dreams and ambitions outweighed the dangers of the Wild West. For many, the risk was too much, and many succumbed to the dangers of western living within a few days. The new frontier didn't have doctors. There were little to no trade routes in the beginning to assist with medicine and supplies. Disease and famine were rampant, and men were violently killing each other over greed and jealousy. To accommodate the growing number of the dead, 40 acres of land was purchased in 1863, thus beginning the history of the Pioneer Cemetery. The population of the Pioneer Cemetery was growing faster than the population of Idaho City. Many of the men who left everything behind to make it rich was dead within a week from the unsavory conditions and violence. There are between 2,000 and 3,000 bodies buried at the Pioneer Cemetery, most lie in unmarked graves. Of the thousands buried here, less than 300 grave sites are identifiable. Of the first 200 people buried here, only 28 died of natural causes. Most were victims of fatal events. Tales of apparitions and period clothing have been told since the early 1900s. People have often reported a misty male form in period clothing floating around the grave markers. His head is always down as if he's reading the names on each stone. A little girl in a blue dress is often seen looking over her grave before disappearing. The Pioneer Cemetery is a beautiful final resting place tucked away from the modern way and trapped in time. Upon your first step, You're overwhelmed with the smell of the pines surrounding you. You feel calm, but can't help but wonder the last thoughts and feelings of the dead surrounding you, most of which died horrifically. Old Idaho State Penitentiary, Boise, Idaho. Shadowed in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains lies the Old Idaho State Penitentiary. The prison was built in 1870 in order for the territory of Idaho to become a state. Idaho in 1870 was a lawless frontier, and in order to be unionized to become a state, it was required to have a prison. The first building, a one-cell jailhouse, was constructed from the sandstone of the Rocky Mountains and was known as the Territorial Prison. 20 years later, on July 3, 1890, Idaho was incorporated as the 43rd state of the United States. With the discovery of gold, the population of Idaho grew, as did its prison. In order to keep up with the demand of housing criminals, inmates were forced to quarry sandstone from the nearby mountains, which was used to add on to the prison. By the 1970s, the one-cell prison grew into the 5-acre, Romanesque Old Idaho State Penitentiary. Surrounded by 17-foot-tall sandstone walls, the penitentiary sits oppressively along the eastern edge of Boise, Idaho. Long before the Europeans discovered the Gem State, the land belonged to the Northern Shoshone tribe of Native Americans. The mountains above the penitentiary, where the quarry was dug, was said to be the site of an ancient burial ground and a spiritual site used for rituals. The Native Americans were forced out of the area by the U.S. government in 1864. For over a decade, 2 brothers from the Shoshone tribe fought back to regain their land but failed. One of the brothers was captured and was the first person to be executed at Old Idaho State Penitentiary. During the excavation of the quarry in 1893, the skeletal remains of ancient natives, along with various relics, were found. The burial grounds were ignored and disturbed by the prisoners that were forced to continue digging in the sacred spot. Human remains were carelessly swept aside, and the natural resources of the land were taken to rebuild the penitentiary. As a final desecration to the Native Americans, a 6-story tall, 4,500-pound cross was erected on site to instill the importance of Christianity as the one true religion. The cross still stands today. At 3,629 feet above sea level, the cross sits erect, high above the penitentiary, a reminder of penance to those corrupted. The penitentiary held 13,000 inmates during its 101 years of operation, housing some of the most dangerous criminals in Idaho. The youngest prisoner of Idaho State Penitentiary was 11-year-old James Jimmy Whitaker. Whitaker served 8 years for shooting his mother, killing her over having to do the laundry. The first female serial killer in the United States was incarcerated at the penitentiary, as well as Idaho's Jack the Ripper. In the early years of operation, there wasn't a separate housing for the female prisoners. Many of the women were put in cells with men. During this time, many of the female prisoners became pregnant from being raped by both male prisoners and prison guards. A separate cell block was constructed in 1920 to separate the women from the predominantly male population. Many of the women were incarcerated for terrible reasons, including adultery and talking back to their husbands. But one inmate, known as the first female serial killer in the United States and dubbed the Black Widow, was imprisoned at the penitentiary. 21-year-old Lyda Southard began killing in 1915. By 1920, she had murdered 4 of her husbands, her brother-in-law, and her 2-year-old daughter, using arsenic poisoning to claim the life insurance money. After only 20 years incarceration, Lyda Southard was free at the age of 49. In 1950, Lyda married a wealthy man named Hal Shaw and had her name changed to Anna Elizabeth Shaw. 2 years later, Hal went missing and was never seen again. His disappearance is still a mystery to this day. On February 5, 1958, the Black Widow had a massive heart attack in the streets of Salt Lake City. The murderous maiden died in the streets at the age of 65. One of the most notorious inmates and the last to be executed at the penitentiary was Idaho's own Jack the Ripper, Raymond Allen Snowden. Although Snowden was only convicted of the murder of 48-year-old mother of 2 Cora Lucille Dean, he bragged to other prisoners of killing multiple women. Snowden was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by hanging on October 18, 1957, at the age of 35, but his execution went horribly wrong. When the lever was pulled and the trap beneath his feet gave way, the fall didn't immediately break his neck as planned. Snowden hung there for 15 agonizing minutes, struggling to breathe and slowly choking to death. Those witnessing the execution were horrified by the gruesome suffering of Snowden's final minutes. Snowden was buried in an unmarked grave on the prison grounds. Many people claim to feel tightness in their chest and neck when visiting the gallows, and the choking screams and rasping breaths of Raymond Allen Snowden can be heard often through the halls. Many have seen his apparition walking the grounds near his unmarked grave. Snowden isn't the only ghost said to haunt the penitentiary. There were 129 recorded deaths within the walls of the prison, with many more said to have never been documented. The living conditions at the prison were inhumane. The sandstone the penitentiary was built with retained and increased the hot temperatures of the desert air, making it as hot as an oven in the summer and freezing cold in the winter. There was no ventilation and no toilets. Prisoners had to use honey buckets to dispose of their waste and excrement. These buckets sat in the cells and were only cleaned once a day. Each cell housed up to 6 men at a time, and it was common for the honey bucket to be accidentally tipped over or stepped in. The worst punishments for the most unruly inmates was a trip to isolation. Nicknamed Siberia by the inmates because it was the last place on earth you'd want to be. The 3-by-8-foot concrete dwellings had a small circular opening in the top so that inmates would know whether it was night or day. The hole offered very little ventilation, and the small drains on the floor did little to capture the bodily fluids of trapped inmates. Punishment in the isolation wards lasted from a day to an entire year. Many whom were stuck in Siberia went crazy from the confined space and unsanitary conditions. Today, visitors and staff have heard maniacal screaming and moaning cries coming from the isolation cells. The inhumane conditions of the prison were enough for the inmates to engage in multiple riots throughout the years. And in 1973, the inmates rioted for the last time, setting multiple buildings in the complex on fire. The remaining prisoners were moved to a more modern and humane prison facility, and the old Idaho State Penitentiary was closed for good. The historic building was added to the National Register of Historic Places on December 3, 1973, and reopened as a history museum soon after. But many inmates still linger at the old pen, haunting the corridors and cells. In 1952, a cat was smuggled through the guard tower by an inmate and remained with the prisoners for 16 years. The feline, named Dennis the cat, was buried on the prison grounds and was given his own grave marker. Some say you can still see the ghost of Dennis the cat patrolling the prison yard. Along with Dennis, there are countless other spirits haunting the penitentiary. Many have seen dark, shadowy figures roaming the halls. Apparitions of former inmates appear and disappear, and many have witnessed the cell doors opening and slamming shut. There's a discomfort many claim to feel when walking along the corridors. Feelings of helplessness and being watched are often reported by both staff and visitors. Some have felt the presence of something touch them, and some have even been pushed by something unseen. Footsteps can be heard at all hours throughout the prison, even though it is empty, and disembodied voices echo throughout the halls of the old Idaho State Penitentiary. Idaho State University, Pocatello, Idaho. The city of Pocatello, Idaho was established in 1889 and named after the Shoshone Native American tribe leader, Chief Pocatello. The land was taken by the U.S. government in 1868 after years of fighting the fierce and unrelenting Shoshone tribes. Fearing further bloodshed of his people, Chief Pocatello signed the Fort Bridger Treaty of 1868 and moved his people to Fort Hall Reservation along the Snake River. Although the U.S. government promised to pay $5,000 annually to help the reservation survive, they rarely upheld their end of the treaty. Because of this, the Shoshone tribe struggled for survival and suffered severe famine and death. Was this the catalyst that caused the city of Pocatello to be one of the most haunted towns in the country? During the height of the gold rush, Pocatello, Idaho became a hub for those traveling westward. The railroad was completed in 1876, thus increasing the population of Pocatello, Idaho. With the increase of population, the Academy of Idaho was built to offer classes for college preparation and industrial courses. But it wasn't until 1963, with the expansion and growth of the city, that the small Academy of Ohio grew into the Idaho State University. Many of the students and staff of the university have reported unexplained and eerie things happening around campus. The administration building is host to a male spirit that hangs around the bathrooms. Many have heard phantom coughs coming from the halls, accompanied by the smell of cigar smoke. A spirit by the name of Frank haunts the Roy F. Christensen building. Both students and staff have reported footsteps running down the halls, as well as doors violently opening and closing on their own. A security officer was patrolling the Business and Technology Center building when he heard his name being called. Upon hearing this throughout his walk, he thought the other security guard may be playing a prank on him. He radioed the guard and was disturbed to learn he was on the other end of the campus. As with the Roy F. Christensen building, doors within the Business and Technology Center open and close on their own, and footsteps are heard running up and down the halls when the building is vacant. The Gale Life Science building is haunted by the ghosts of the cadavers brought into the lab for research. Many of the staff and students feel uncomfortable in the building and accompany each other in groups when leaving for fear of walking the building alone. Many of the campus police officers have experienced strange noises coming from the cadaver lab at night while on patrol. Gravely Hall is one of the oldest surviving buildings on campus. Originally built as a women's dormitory, Gravely Hall is now the site of the faculty offices. The second floor of Gravely Hall is one of the most active locations on campus. Since its opening in 1939, students and staff have reported phantom footsteps, doors and windows opening and closing on their own, and feelings of being watched. During World War II, the building was used as housing and training for female naval cadets. Multiple suicides happened in this building over the years, and many speculate that the ghosts haunting these halls may have been one of those tragic deaths. The most haunted and oldest building on campus is Fraser Hall. Opened on September 1, 1924, Fraser Hall has been the home of the Idaho State University Theater. Many of the staff and students believe this building is haunted by the ghost of a boy named Alex. The story told around campus is that a professor would often bring her son Alex to work with her in the Fraser building. He loved the building so much that, after his death, his spirit still resides at the theater. Alex likes to play pranks on the living. Many have witnessed doors opening and closing on their own, and some have even seen the apparition of a boy sitting at the top row of the theater. Shadows have been seen darting across the stage during performances, as well as the sound of a piano playing on its own. The fourth floor is said to be very active, with the sounds of footsteps walking the corridors when no one is in the building. The apparition of a woman has been seen by many looking out the middle top floor window. A campus security officer was sent to check on the Fraser building around midnight after a 911 call had been made from the building. There was no one in the building at the time the call was made, so the officer was on edge. As he opened the door to Fraser Hall, the sound of a woman screaming was heard coming from within the building. The officer radioed for backup. When additional officers arrived and checked the building, they found it to be completely empty. Standrod Mansion, Pocatello, Idaho. The Standrod Mansion in Pocatello, Idaho, was built by wealthy judge and entrepreneur Drew William Standrod in 1902. The massive castle-esque architecture was the first of its kind, being the first home in Idaho to be lit by electric lighting. Drew William Standrod was a pillar of the community. As a member of the Public Utilities Commission, Standrod was responsible for writing many of the irrigation and water usage laws that are still in use today. The house remained in the Standrod family for 55 years and witnessed the eventual deaths of the entire Standrod family before passing ownership to the city of Pocatello in 1957. Although the home had passed through many different owners, many believe the Standrods still inhabit their family home. To understand the Standrod Mansion, we have to look more into the deaths of the Standrod family. Elvira Campbell Standrod. The first death within the Standrod Mansion was that of 16-year-old Elvira Cammie Standrod. Cammie was born on February 23, 1890, the first child of Drew William Standrod and his wife Emma. Cammie suffered from kidney disease and struggled throughout her childhood, but she remained outgoing and was the leader of her class throughout school. At the age of 16, Cammie fell in love with a boy, one of her classmates. Drew William Standrod did not approve. Soon after, the boy went missing and was never seen again. Distraught and heartbroken, Cammie remained in her room in the tower of the Standrod Mansion, where she died soon after. Although this is the legend often told by Pocatello natives, the facts remain that Cammie Standrod died in the tower of the Standrod Mansion at the age of 16. Was it a lifelong struggle with kidney disease that took young Cammie's life? Or did she die from a broken heart? After her death, the Standrods closed up Cammie's room in the tower and never opened it again. Many believe Cammie's spirit haunts the turret room. Her apparition has been seen by many walking past the mansion. She is often seen staring out of the tower window and has even been seen floating above the tower. Her presence is often felt in the room where she died. Many people have experienced unexplained feelings of hopelessness, loneliness, and sadness. The woeful sounds of wailing cries have been attributed to Cammie's ghost. Drew William Standrod Jr. D.W. Standrod Jr. was born on May 6, 1891. He was 15 years old at the time of his sister's death. He married Lucy Hostetler in 1928. While in California visiting relatives, D.W. Standrod Jr. became ill and died due to complications from being gassed during his term in World War I on April 2, 1937, at the age of 45. He left behind his widow and his grieving parents. His body was returned to Pocatello after his death, and he was buried beside his sister. Many believe the ghost of a young boy often seen on the property is that of a young D.W. Standrod Jr. The house's namesake, Drew William Standrod. The Honorable Drew William Standrod took his final breath on December 21, 1942, at the age of 84, leaving behind the matriarch of the Standrod family, Emma Standrod. His official cause of death was a pulmonary edema. Like his daughter, he died of a broken heart. Many have seen the apparition of a man in period clothing on the mansion's porch. The ghost of Drew William Standrod has also been seen in the parlor sitting in his favorite chair. Emma Standrod. After the death of her 2 children and husband, Emma Standrod was left alone in the Standrod mansion. For 4 years, Emma walked the lonely halls of her home until her death. On November 19, 1943, 96-year-old Emma Standrod suffered a fatal fall down the mansion stairs. For 66 days, Emma remained in the hospital but never recovered. Emma died at 6:10 a.m. on the morning of January 24, 1946. The ghostly figure of a woman in white is often seen floating down the stairs. Many believe this is the spirit of Emma Standrod. After the deaths of the entire Standrod family, the sole survivor and heir to the Standrod mansion was D.W. Standrod Jr.'s widow, Lucy Hostetler Standrod. She tried to live in the home, but after only 3 years, she boarded up the Standrod mansion and never returned. The mansion passed through many owners since the Standrods, all of them claiming to have a paranormal experience in the home. In 2018, the mansion was purchased and has been in the process of being restored to its original condition. The new owner has already had multiple encounters with the deceased Standrod family. Strange things were happening as soon as the first night. After an exhausting day of moving and restoration, the current owner turned in for an early night. Just as she was about to fall asleep, a loud crash came from the floor below her. Being too tired to investigate, she waited until morning to see what had caused the commotion. The next day, the owner found that a hand-blown glass vase that had been sitting on the windowsill was now in the middle of the room lying on the floor. The vase hit the floor with such force that it left a dent in the wood flooring, yet the glass vase didn't even have a scratch. Another incident occurred with multiple witnesses. The owner and some contractors were standing on the porch when they all saw a floating white transparent figure gliding across the backyard, and then it disappeared. No noise, just a silent floating form that was there and then wasn't.